The champagne glass slipped from my fingers in slow motion. I watched it fall, crystal catching the chandelier light before it shattered across white marble, spraying wine like arterial spray across my sister's wedding reception. But I barely heard the crash over the ringing in my ears as my father's voice boomed through the microphone. Isabella has generously agreed to give Charlotte her penthouse as a wedding gift. 200 faces turned toward me. Applause erupted. My mother's smile was radiant, practiced. Charlotte's eyes went wide with theatrical surprise, her hand flying to her mouth. The orchestra had stopped playing. Someone started chanting my name. And I stood there, frozen, while my father beamed at the crowd like he'd just announced world peace instead of publicly stealing everything I'd spent 10 years building. A man I'd never seen before rose from a table near the back. His voice cut through the applause, calm but absolute. Touch her assets again, and you'll lose yours. The ballroom went silent. My name is Isabella. I'm 38, and I'm a vice president at one of the largest financial firms in Asia Pacific. This is the story of how I learned that family loyalty only flows one direction until you cut off the supply. Before I explain what happened next, I need you to understand how we got here. My family doesn't do anything small. My father, Richard Hayes, built his commercial real estate company from the ground up, and he's spent the last 30 years making sure everyone knows it. My mother, Carol, manages the family image like a Fortune 500 brand, every detail curated, every appearance calculated. Together, they created a world where success is measured in square footage and social standing. Charlotte is their masterpiece. 3 years younger than me, blonde where I'm brunette, soft where I'm sharp. She's always been the daughter who made sense to them, the one who married well, hosted charity luncheons, and knew which fork to use at every occasion. I'm the one who worked 80-hour weeks, closed deals in 3 languages, and somehow still wasn't quite enough. For 15 years, I've been the family's silent ATM. When my father's Atlanta development went sideways in 2019, I wired $200,000 to cover the shortfall. When my mother needed emergency dental work that insurance wouldn't cover, I paid the $15,000 bill without blinking. When Charlotte's first wedding fell through and she needed help with vendor cancellations, I transferred $50,000 and never mentioned it again. They never said thank you. They just expected it, like my salary existed specifically to subsidize their lifestyle. 3 months ago, Charlotte got engaged to Preston Montgomery III, whose family owns half the commercial properties in Charleston. My parents were ecstatic. This was the merger they'd dreamed of. Within days, wedding planning consumed our family like a hostile takeover. I should have seen the signs earlier. The way my mother would pause mid-sentence when I entered a room. How my father stopped including me in his weekly business calls. The group chat that suddenly went quiet whenever I responded. But I was busy closing a $40 million development deal in Singapore, and I told myself I was being paranoid. 2 weeks before the wedding, my father asked me to lunch at his club, the kind of place where old money goes to feel superior, all dark wood paneling and waiters who've memorized your drink order since 1987. Charlotte's struggling with wedding costs, he said, cutting into his steak. The venue alone is running $150,000. I set down my fork. You told me you were covering the wedding. We are, mostly. He didn't meet my eyes. But you know how these things spiral. It would mean a lot to your sister if you could help with the reception. I transferred $75,000 that afternoon. He texted back a thumbs-up emoji. No thank you. No acknowledgement that I'd just funded what most people earn in 2 years. The morning of the wedding, I woke up in my penthouse, the one I'd bought myself at 32 after my first 7-figure bonus. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, custom Italian marble, a home gym that cost more than my first car. Every square inch of it earned through deals that kept me awake for days, negotiations that aged me years, sacrifices my family would never understand or appreciate. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. They're planning something. Stay alert. I stared at it for a full minute. The number belonged to William Carter, my professional advisor for the past 3 years, though I didn't recognize it as his personal line. He'd been monitoring my family's communications through business intelligence channels after noticing concerning patterns in my father's recent inquiries about my compensation structure. At the time, I assumed it was a wrong number. I had enough to worry about without adding paranoid conspiracy theories to the mix, so I deleted it and continued getting ready. The wedding ceremony was flawless. Charlotte looked stunning in her Vera Wang gown. Preston gazed at her like she'd hung the moon, and my parents glowed with satisfaction. I sat in the third row, not the second, where immediate family belongs, but the third, tucked between distant cousins I hadn't seen since childhood. The reception was everything my mother had orchestrated. Crystal chandeliers, white roses imported from Ecuador, a live orchestra playing Vivaldi. I found my seat at table 7, surrounded by Charlotte's college friends who talked around me like I was part of the centerpiece. That's when I noticed him. William Carter in a charcoal suit standing near the bar, watching the room with the calm assessment of someone conducting surveillance. He caught my eye and gave a subtle nod, then turned back to his phone. I realized then he was the one who'd sent the warning text, but I still didn't understand why he was there. Dinner service began. I pushed salmon around my plate while Charlotte's maid of honor gave a tearful speech about sisterhood and unconditional love. My mother kept glancing at me from the head table, her smile sharp as a blade. Then my father stood up, tapped his champagne glass with a knife until the room fell silent. "Before we continue," he said, his voice carrying that practiced warmth he used in boardroom presentations, "I want to talk about family." My stomach dropped. "A family's strength," he continued, scanning the crowd like a politician working a rally, "isn't measured by what we keep. It's measured by what we share." I felt my pulse in my throat. This wasn't a toast. This was a setup. "Tonight," my father said, his smile widening, "we have something extraordinary to celebrate. My eldest daughter, Isabella, has decided to give her sister." He paused for effect, letting the tension build. "Her penthouse as a wedding gift." The words hit me like a physical blow. For 3 seconds, I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only watch as applause erupted around me, as cameras flashed, as Charlotte pressed her hands to her face in manufactured surprise. My father hadn't asked me, he'd announced it, made it public so I couldn't refuse without looking petty, selfish, cruel. The champagne glass slipped from my hand. "Isabella!" My father's voice boomed through the microphone. "Come up here, sweetheart, say a few words." Every head turned toward me. 200 people waiting for me to smile, to play along, to sacrifice myself on the altar of family harmony. I didn't stand. I sat there, frozen, while the applause slowly died and confusion rippled through the crowd. That's when William rose from his seat. "Touch her assets again," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel, "and you'll lose yours." The ballroom went dead quiet. He walked toward the front of the room, each footstep echoing against marble. My father's face drained of color. My mother grabbed his arm, whispering something frantic. "William Carter," he said, pulling a business card from his jacket, "CEO of Carter Financial Group and Isabella's professional advisor for the past 3 years, which is how I learned about tonight's ambush when your father contacted my firm last week, asking about the legal transferability of executive compensation packages." The murmuring started immediately. Half the room knew that name. Carter Financial managed over $3 billion in assets, worked with every major development company on the East Coast, including my father's. "The penthouse your daughter owns?" William continued, his tone conversational but unmistakable in its authority. "The one you just attempted to claim in front of 200 witnesses? That property is part of her executive compensation package. It's protected by anti-coercion clauses under her contract. What you did tonight constitutes attempted asset seizure." My father's lawyer face kicked in. He laughed, but it came out strangled. "This is a family matter, a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," William said. He gestured toward a table near the back where a young man had his phone propped up, red recording light glowing. "This entire event is being live-streamed to your company's investor page. I arranged for documentation after your attorney contacted multiple firms trying to find legal grounds to compel the transfer. 10,000 people just watched you attempt to publicly coerce your daughter into surrendering a $2.3 million property. The room exploded into chaos, gasps, whispers, the scraping of chairs as people stood to get a better view. My mother's face went white. Charlotte started crying, real tears this time, mascara tracking down her cheeks. Richard. A man stood up from table 3, Marcus Patterson, my father's largest investor. Is this true? My father stammered something, but Patterson was already walking toward the exit. Patterson Industries is suspending all current contracts with Hayes Development, effective immediately. Another voice from across the room. So is Williams Logistics. And another. Kim Construction as well. I watched my father's empire crumble in real time, each departing investor another nail in the coffin he'd built himself. William turned to me, his expression softening. Would you like to address the room? Every eye fixed on me. My mother looked like she might faint. Charlotte had collapsed into her new husband's arms, sobbing. My father stood at the microphone, a man who'd just watched his kingdom fall. I stood slowly, my legs somehow steady beneath me. You wanted a spectacle, I said, my voice carrying across the silent ballroom. You got one. I walked toward the front, my heels clicking against marble. My mother reached for me, but I stepped past her. For 15 years, I said, I've funded this family's lifestyle. I've paid for emergencies that weren't emergencies. I've covered debts you never acknowledged. I've smiled through holidays where you introduced me as Isabella, she works in finance somewhere, while I was closing deals that could have bought this entire venue. My father tried to speak, but I held up my hand. Tonight, you decided to take the one thing I built myself, the home I earned. You announced it publicly so I couldn't refuse without looking like the villain. I looked at Charlotte, who was still crying, into Preston's shoulder. You used my sister's wedding as leverage. I turned back to the crowd. So let me be very clear. I will not be giving anyone my penthouse. Not tonight, not ever. And if my family continues attempting to claim what isn't theirs, they'll discover exactly how much of their lifestyle I've been subsidizing. The silence was absolute. I handed the microphone back to William and walked toward the exit. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice crack. Isabella, please. I didn't turn around. William caught up with me in the hallway. Are you all right? I took a breath, felt the cool air conditioning against my flushed skin. I am now. He smiled slightly. You handled that with more grace than most would. No, I said. I just stopped apologizing for taking up space. He handed me his card, a real one this time. When you're ready to discuss your next career move, call me. Carter Financial could use someone who knows how to stand their ground. I looked at the card, then back at the closed ballroom doors where my family's perfect wedding had turned into their public reckoning. I'll think about it, I said. I spent that night in my penthouse, unable to sleep, replaying the evening's events in my mind. By morning, the video had gone viral. 1 minute of footage, my father's announcement, the crowd's reaction, William's intervention, had been viewed over 1 million times. The headlines wrote themselves. Father attempts to steal daughter's home at sister's wedding. Exec stands up to family exploitation in viral video. My inbox exploded. Messages from strangers thanking me. Stories from women who'd been financially exploited by family. Interview requests from major networks. 3 different production companies wanted to option the story. The fallout from my parents was swift and brutal. Patterson, Williams, and Kim didn't just suspend contracts. They publicly announced why, citing ethical concerns about Richard Hayes' character. The company's stock dropped 40% in 2 days. My father's carefully cultivated reputation as a family man and honest businessman evaporated overnight. My mother tried damage control with a tearful video explaining she'd been caught up in wedding emotion and never meant to hurt anyone. The comments section ripped her apart. Tens of thousands of people who'd watched her smile while my father announced the theft had no sympathy left. Charlotte's marriage didn't survive the fallout. Preston's family, horrified to be associated with the scandal, pressured him to annul within the month. Charlotte called me once during that time, sobbing as she signed the annulment papers. "He said he couldn't be married to someone from a family of thieves," she told me. I listened in silence, then hung up. She moved back in with our parents, her perfect life dissolving like sugar in rain. I stayed silent through all of it. Didn't give interviews, didn't post on social media, didn't defend or attack. The truth had already done the work for me. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of media requests I ignored, my phone constantly buzzing with messages from strangers and reporters. When William finally called with a formal offer, I was ready for a change. Board position at Carter Financial, $450,000 annual compensation plus equity, full autonomy over the Asia-Pacific division. I accepted. On my first day, I stood in my new corner office, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, just like my penthouse, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Your father's in the hospital. Heart attack. Thought you should know." I stared at the message for a long moment. He survived. My mother's follow-up texts confirmed that over the next few days, messages I read but never answered. His recovery would take months, but that was no longer my concern. I put the phone down and got back to work. Over the following 2 months, I settled into my new role and heard nothing from my family except my mother's periodic texts about my father's recovery. Texts I read but never answered. Then, Charlotte's letter arrived. No return address, postmarked from somewhere in Colorado. "I'm sorry," it read. I knew what they were planning. I should have stopped it. I was selfish and cruel, and I don't expect forgiveness. But I want you to know that I understand now what you sacrificed for us. I'm trying to build something of my own, without their money or influence. It's harder than I ever imagined. I'm sorry it took losing everything for me to see you clearly. I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer. Maybe someday I'd respond. Maybe I wouldn't. Either way, it was no longer my responsibility to absolve her guilt. As for my parents, I never responded to my mother's messages. No reconciliation, no closure, no final confrontation. They were simply no longer part of my life, and I'd made my peace with that finality. 6 months after the wedding that changed everything, I stood in my penthouse, the same one my father had tried to steal, and looked at the framed photo on my shelf. My grandmother smiling at the camera, her handwritten note beside it. "Never let them make you smaller to fit their comfort." I'd carried that advice for years without truly understanding it. Now I did. My phone rang. William's name lit up the screen. "We just closed the Singapore deal," he said. $40 million, exactly as you projected. The client specifically requested you handle the expansion." I smiled at my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows. "When do we start?" "Monday, but tonight the team's celebrating at Morton's. You should come." For the first time in 15 years, I was being invited somewhere not because I was funding it, but because I'd earned my seat at the table. "I'll be there," I said. After I hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and walked out onto the balcony. The city spread out below me, lights flickering like a constellation of possibilities. Somewhere out there, my parents were dealing with the consequences of their choices. Charlotte was trying to rebuild a life without their money. My father's company was struggling to survive without the investors he'd alienated. None of it was my problem anymore. I raised my glass to the skyline and whispered the words I'd waited years to mean. To standing alone. If you've ever sat at a table surrounded by family who made you feel invisible, know this: you're not alone. Your worth isn't measured by what they take from you. It's measured by what you refuse to surrender. Share your story in the comments and subscribe for more real talk about the moments that change everything. Before you go, here's a quick bonus for sticking around. If you love learning and growing like I do, you need to try audiobooks. I've got an exclusive deal with Audible. Your first month is completely free. That's access to over 500,000 titles, zero cost to you. All the details are waiting in the description. Don't miss this one.